GA happens. And we even got some great GA announcement yesterday with Satya's keynote around Copilot, our AI pair programmer, and some of the new services on Azure, which one of them is my personal favorite, DevBox machines, now empowering every programmer. So all of those announcements are really reflecting where the industry is going. And this is around empowering developers to be more than ever before, own security on a larger capacity. And for this, we do have a panel today of some of the top startups, community owners, partners from across the region, discuss what we learned here in Middle East and Africa, and how you can leverage our experience to step up your security practices as software engineers and truly shift left. So while this session is live, you can feel free to share your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to address them during the panel. And with that, let's start. I want to start with a quick round of introduction and maybe just sharing top of mind from every one of our panelists. So Quentin, you're coming from South Africa, which is a massive and super diverse region. We have lots of developers and community of companies there. So please introduce yourself to our build attendants and give us your take on the state of security in that region.
Thanks, Adair. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's Quentin de Kock. I'm the head of cloud services at Tangent Solutions, who are a 9 gold competency partner. And the state of security within our region is really highlighted by the Interpol Cyber Threat Assessment Report from 2021, where South Africa was ranked the 3rd highest number of cybercrime victims worldwide, which is really quite something to do with 40 million people. We've seen a 100% increase in mobile banking application fraud, and the costs have been in the range of around 2.2 billion rand or $150 million to South Africa alone. And we've seen this in our customers, FSI customers, government customers, and so forth. And what we're seeing them do is an increased investment into trying to thwart these kinds of cyber threat attacks from earlier in the development life cycle.
Yeah, so let's deep dive into this. What's really popular with developers that we're seeing in South Africa? What are some of the practices that they're using?
So I think the key thing about what developers can do is just do it earlier. Do as much as you can in terms of security scanning early on in your phase, right? So I think from a learnings perspective, developers need to understand what GitHub dorking and Google dorking is in terms of OSINT, to understand how hackers can actually scan your repositories to find secrets. So don't check secrets in, right? Make sure you have a secret scanning tool on top of that. Make sure you're controlling your software bill of materials, a very important point. So make sure that your package management and container security scanning is included in there. And there are multiple tools for this. Secret scanning has Yelp, you have the GitHub options there as well. In the package management, there are hundreds, JFrog, and so forth. And then the other thing that we're seeing a lot of is infrastructure as code, and understanding securing infrastructure as code, and making sure you don't have misconfiguration of cloud-based deployments. So that you have tools like TFSec and so forth. So I think in summary, there are 3 things you need to be thinking about as a developer. You need to be thinking about identity and access management. That's number 1, because the number 1 vector is always phishing or some sort of malware attack through email. The second is network security. I think you need to understand it and how you don't move east-west within an environment. And the last is application or code security.
Perfect. So I'm hearing a lot of tools and a lot of policies that we can start. GitHub Advanced Security is one of them. Brian, you're coming from JFrog, and I think you're definitely facing a lot of those challenges that Quentin just shared in a very worldwide, massive scale. So please give us a few words on your role in JFrog and just a taste on what you think are the prominent threats to software developers in this region.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Musali. I'm a security research tech lead here in JFrog Security. So when we talk about shifting left, when we're talking about shifting left in development, we would like to think about how to prevent or how to start identifying vulnerabilities earlier. Vulnerabilities are often discovered in production systems at runtime. We don't like that. It causes panic. our clients' information can get stolen. Our information can get stolen. Nobody likes that. We don't like panic. We should avoid it. And maybe we can try about how to. We can try and think about how to address these issues in build time or in development time. So one of the things Quentin talked about, which is a very important thing, a very important point, is the software bill of materials. In a large software project, it is very often hard to keep track on what is installed and what is used. And it may often lead to the following, to exposures to your projects in two main forms. One of them is third-party vulnerabilities in the third-party packages. So many of us know that you mentioned Log4j earlier, and many of us know that a lot of packages we are dependent on when we are developing our software projects can come up with vulnerabilities. Those are usually assigned with CVEs, which help us identify them and maybe keep track on what's going on. And another thing is another very prominent attack that we're seeing these days, and in the last couple of years, we've seen hundreds of such attacks, are supply chain attacks. Supply chain attacks is actually a technique in which a malicious actor slips malicious code or an entire malicious component into a trusted piece of software or hardware, maybe. And we like to think about NPM or PyPI or Maven repositories as trusted, but in the field of security, we don't like to trust anyone. We can't actually trust anyone. And we've seen in the last couple of years, malicious components get injected into projects, into software environments, and with malicious code, such as info stealers, that can steal credit cards or credentials, or even we see Discord tokens being stolen, code that's used for crypto mining even. So vulnerabilities in third-party packages and supply chain attacks are my highlights for this talk.
Definitely. And by the way, I think a very interesting point is the vulnerabilities on third parties that you're not using, but the components that you downloaded are using. So there's a lot of here. I personally met some customers that thought they're not using Log4j, but they used so many packages that use Log4j that were opened up from all of the directions. So it's a lot of cascades or open source world there. And I think what you mentioned on the party packages and supply chain is way bigger than just what we do. We need to really have something systematic around that. Lastly, ER, you're part of the Founders Hub program in Microsoft for Startups, which, as the CTO of the program in Israel, I have to do some advertising here. Strongly recommend everybody with an idea to check out startups.microsoft.com. So I'm hearing a lot of investments from the panelists here, on the vulnerability side, on the secrets, on the code scanning. Sounds like too much for a startup. I mean, how do we start at such a small team? Give us some tips on the challenges, specifically as we know there's a lot of coding things that we need to do, MVP that we need to complete, short of the developers. So how can we take all of those great or not so great risks and really couple them into such a short dev team?
That's a really good point, Adir. So my name is Eyal Zilberman, and as you mentioned, I'm leading the product and co-founder of the Tree, which is an open source tool for preventing Kubernetes misconfiguration from reaching production. Basically, the way that we're doing it is that we are applying security and best practices policies into the developer workflow, exactly in the shift left method that we are talking here. So we have more than 7,000 accounts that are using our tool in their environment, and this is give us a lot of insight about how different types of organizations, from startups to enterprises, are actually dealing with those type of challenges that we're discussing in this panel. I'm also in a different hat, also leading the local GitHub community here in Israel, which is, by the way, the biggest in the world. So FYI, I'm a little GitHub fan here. So I'm sorry in advance if the tools that I'm going to mention are actually GitHub tools. But regarding your question, So a lot of the challenges that we are discussing on the security aspect and related to big enterprises or teams that have a lot of security people that are actually able to enforce different policies or to research those security vulnerabilities, it's not the same when you're dealing with startups. And just to give you the general profile of what I call a startup. So usually a startup is 1 to 2 DevOps, DevSecOps people that are responsible for the entire organization. And usually security in this case is something that you do in additional and it's not a full-time role. So what we see is that a lot of time those DevSecOps people, they prefer to actually have quick wins and low-hanging fruits, because when you're a startup, sometimes it's more important to actually shift really, really fast over shift it really, really secure, which is not always good, but in fact, this is what's happening. Because if you shift, if you shift it secure, but no one is using it or no one wants it, you don't have a business use case here. So that's the truth. So what's happening is that I see in the community and also with the tree that a lot of the time, like I mentioned, they prefer the quick wins. And you mentioned a lot of best practices that you can enforce or start using. So let's be practical. And a lot of them is actually around make sure that you have clean code with no secrets, that you patch your vulnerabilities, that you scan your code with static code analysis. And by the way, also Quentin mentioned it, there's also configuration that's sitting inside your repositories. And this configuration for your infrastructure should always be scanned for security vulnerabilities, for stability issues, best practices, all the stuff that we know that need to be set up. But the cool part is that a lot of those challenges are actually, we are able to solve them with tools that are already integrated into the ecosystem, which is GitHub in this case. So GitHub is no longer just a place to store your code, is also provide a lot of solutions for that. So we already mentioned Dependable, which is great for patching. Again, there are different tools, but what I see with the community and what I see with our customers is that they prefer to have it all in one tool over have the best of breed, which is, by the way, I'm not going to say which one is better or not, but they always prefer to have it all in one tool, which it's a great quick win. You just go go enable a checkbox, and that's it. You have all those different stuff that we discussed enabled by default. So this is the kind of stuff that I see from the community. I would say that the only problem that I see is that it's not enabled by default. So you do need to go and enable it from your settings. And something really, really cool for startups and not a lot of them are aware of is that GitHub, the paid version that enable you all those features, is actually part of the Founders app for Microsoft for Start program. So there's actually no reason to actually start be secure from day one. And maybe this way startups can be also ship fast, but also be more secure. So that's my take about startups and how they can actually have those quick wins.
Love it, love it. As you can see from my shirt, love the GitHub call out and also the Founders Hub call out. You're doing the work for me. But again, GitHub Enterprise is part of the program. This is a great starting point for secret scanning, for dependency scanning, for code scanning, and it's all part of the package that you already have. So go apply, activate everything ER mentioned.
I will also mention that the name GitHub Enterprise is sometimes misleading. It's actually also useful for startups. So don't think that only enterprises are using GitHub Enterprise. It's also good capabilities for startups.
We'll take this. We'll take this with the marketing team and make it so there's a GitHub for startups, which is the same product, just different branding. Good. So now when we're all introduced and comfortable, let's get real with some challenges, right? I mean, this is all great in theory, secret scanning, installing, just applying a checkbox in GitHub, and we're all in that, heaven zone. But we know that for massive, large teams, and specifically for smaller ones, delegating responsibilities is a problem. It's a problem in large team. It's a problem in understaffed teams. Everybody has so many other tasks that they need to do. So a question I'm getting from almost every company in the Middle East and Africa region is, what can we do with delegating that responsibility or in a more efficient way? So let's start some wars here, because I know that this question is it's kind of bringing a bomb into the panel. Who should take responsibility for security? Who should we fire if you don't do DevSecOps quite properly? In other words, how do we foster the right team mechanism to make sure that we did shift left and we didn't just talk about all the cool stuff that we can do? So, Quentin, let's start with you. What do you think about that delegating responsibility discussion?
So I think the first things you've got to do, right, is automate as much as you can and do it early within your development lifecycle, right? So check those tick boxes in GitHub, find open source tools if you're using GitLab or Bitbucket or Azure DevOps. Find some tools that are going to help you with those key scanning items we spoke about. Again, secret scanning, very, very important. SBOM, so your software bill of materials, very, very important. And even if you just put those two in an automated fashion and begin to generate those reports, because the data is there, somebody has to take accountability. Now, one of the things you want to try and prevent is a siloed approach, right? So in the DevOps environment, one of the anti-patterns that we have is this siloed approach where there's an ops team in the middle of the day, or a ops team and a DevOps team and a dev team. They're not the same team, right? And I think you don't want to do the same thing where you have a dev team and a security team and a DevSecOps team in the middle, because that just breaks the whole principle. So firstly, generate your vulnerabilities, understand what your landscape looks like using tools that are available either in GitHub or other open source tools. A lot of these tools are open source and free to use. For instance, White Source Bolt for SBOM can be used to do your bill of materials scanning and that kind of thing, to pick up CVEs that are possibly in your code. And then, once you have the data, you're going to need to move this to the development team. The development team is going to have a look at this and understand how that they can begin to make changes to address these vulnerabilities. So for instance, in our environment, we do a lot of Django development. Make sure you have an up-to-date version of Django. It's very simple, because you can see the first entry on the report is Django 3.7 is no longer, it has the following CVEs. It's very simple to do, because now you have the data, you understand what your backlog looks like, and you can build this into your backlog as a development team.
Perfect. And I think from a policy perspective, that makes a lot of sense, but we still have some tracking issues on how to make sure that this is really what's happening within the teams. So Brian, what's your take on this, specifically if we're trying to think about tracking that this actually works and not just a definition on a slide?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say that we should try not to fire anyone at here. No, why? There's a reason I'm saying that, because keeping track, like Quentin mentioned CVEs, keeping track of CVEs is a very, very, very hard work. We've got, I don't know how many people here in JFrog that are looking at CVEs daily, hundreds of them, maybe thousands a month, and we can't implement. I don't think everyone can implement that in their development team. So delegating this responsibility to an outside company, like the solution JFrog offers, would be a good thought. So what we offer, or what our approach for that, is static code analysis. So what we're talking about, if I mentioned earlier, vulnerabilities in third-party packages. There are some issues we would like to see, that not always we include a package that is in a vulnerable way. Sometimes we include a package that has a CVE in it, and we don't use that package in a way that makes our software vulnerable for that. So maybe trying to fix that can break a lot of other things which we can't handle right now. So it is also important to know and to distinct between the times where you are vulnerable to that your code is vulnerable because of a third-party package, and the times where your code is not actually vulnerable, but you just included the package that is vulnerable, but you're not using it in a vulnerable way. So what we're talking about here is contextual analysis, that we're trying to identify the exact context in which a package is used, so that we can be smarter and tell our clients, their software developers, tell development teams that that their project is or isn't vulnerable to a certain CVE or not. And also, this type of scans can be introduced into your CI/CD into your CI/CD processes, so that you can scan both code and ecosystem configurations, like ER mentioned before. We'd like to see that our cloud configurations, not only our code, is not vulnerable. So we can get feedback on every build, and that would help us avoid discovering these vulnerabilities at runtime. So also we can get real-time alerts about vulnerabilities in released versions. Like if we released a version like a week ago, when there are new CVEs in a package that we used in that version, which always happens, we can try and get alerts about those CVEs, and we don't have to trouble our development team with checking back CVEs for packages we used like 6 months ago. So delegating code scans to another product, another company, would be a great approach, I think.
Good. So let's fire the procurement company that didn't really buy JFrog software, because that could help you in a lot of things. So never the developer, only the people on the money. Switching gears here, I want to take a live question from the audience, and I'm seeing here one personal favorite of mine, which is also a very hot topic in Middle East and Africa: anti-patterns. So let's drill into this. Which attacks are best protected against, and how can we quickly avoid them? So ER, give me some of your quick guidance on the top anti-patterns and what we can do from, terms of setup, block list, policies to kind of avoid them.
Yeah, sure. So one of the anti-pattern that I usually see, I call it GUI ops, which is the anti-pattern of GitOps. So GUI ops is when you configure your tools with GUI instead of configuration that later on can be stored on Git. And the reason that this is an anti-pattern is because once it's configured on a GUI or dashboard, you are no longer able to first automate it and revisit a different version, collaborate easily on GitHub or a different source control that you have. And this is the biggest anti-pattern that I see. So as you adopt GitOps and all the shift left methodology, it's also important to watch inside your workflow, if it's inside the tools that you use in your CI/CD whatsoever, if you have something that is actually using a dashboard. And if it's using a dashboard, don't use the dashboard. Make sure that you have the as code version of this dashboard. A good example is with policies, for example. So a lot of the tools, you are able to configure the policies on a dashboard. You can check that you want to enforce different CVEs and make sure that you don't have vulnerabilities. But you need to make sure that the same configuration is actually, you are able to export it as code and hosted on your source control, again, from the same reasons that I mentioned. Something else that I see that people are using a lot, which is basically an anti-pattern, is allow list instead of a block list. And I will explain exactly what I mean by that. Is if you're going and say your developers that you are able to use only this specific package or this specific package, this is an anti-pattern. What you need to prefer to do is telling them you can use everything that you want except this specific package or this specific package. It's really, really important to actually enable everything except what is dangerous, and not the opposite, only enable what is you consider as safe. Because developers, they, in order to be free or to have more responsibilities, they also need to control the stack and the tools and the packages that they're using. So the last anti-pattern that I will say from my side is also adopting policies blindly without understanding why it is actually a policy or why it's a best practice, and just trying to enforce it without understand why we're doing it. So that's something that also a lot of people are doing. They're just Googling or copy pasting from somewhere. But I truly encourage you that every policy that you introduce into your organization, make sure that you understand why it's a best practice or why you enforce that.
Love it, love it. Kids, don't do this at home. ER version. So if you haven't, just watch the recording. Make sure you don't do any of those because those are really bad practices. So we're about to finish. So first of all, it was a really incredible discussion, and I think everybody's mind is what's next. So what we can do from skilling perspective, kind of closing remarks on what you think we should do. Let's take like 30 seconds each. Just say what's next for you. What's your closing remarks? What's the one thing that you want to take? You can even stretch for 45, but not too more. Let's start with you, Quentin.
I think learn, right? It's always going to be, in my opinion, learn. I think if there are things you want to specifically look at in terms of learning, Docker for desktop now has an extensions that's in beta. From that, you can pick up a whole bunch of container scanning solutions that will look at your scanning tools like Sneak and JFrog is in there, JFrog X-Ray. So those kinds of things, begin with that. I think if you want to, a good place to see what impact security can have on your systems is to look at what some of the CTFs are about. Looking at guys like Nahemsek and John Hammond on YouTube. Go watch some of their videos. It's scary. Yeah, and learn is probably the key thing for me. And those are good repos to go learn from. YouTube is the best one.
Love it. Brian, what about you?
Well, first of all, of course, I will join Quentin's call to learn. I mean, you can never stop learning about attacks and secure coding. My take is never trust any third-party packages and keep an eye open always on what you're including in your software project, and try to keep up to date with everything that you included in your project and see if something was discovered to be wrong with it. It's very, very, very important. And software composition analysis, know what you're including in your project to the last file. You have to know everything.
Cool. Yeah, 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, so already know that learning is really, really important. I will tell you how do I do my learning, because there's a lot of noise and it's really hard to curate the tools and technologies that you want to check. So usually what I do, I go into the GitHub, I'm checking the size of the community to make sure that it's actually a big community around it, that I'm not going to adopt or try a tool that is only 2 people behind it and no one's going to support me. So that's one thing that I'm doing. The second thing that I'm doing, I'm also going to YouTube and I'm checking the tool to see if there are other people that are using it and they can show me how they are using it. So those are the 2 validations that I'm usually doing when I want to curate or to check a new technology or tool.
Perfect. Love it. I want to thank you for joining today at Build, represented the entire Middle East and Africa family. I think shifting left is a huge topic and one we're extremely proud of to lead from our region. And there's a lot of good insights and learnings that we all shared. Before closing, I just want to highlight many of the announcements and offerings we shared yesterday from GitHub. We've mentioned some of them here, like the Pendabot, like CodeQL, code and secret scanning, and some of the capabilities. As a last reminder, I promised last time I'll mention this, all the founders and startups in the audience, the starter program Founders Hub is now accepting applications and featuring those great tools. So this is a great place for you to jump into the DevSecOps area with mentors, services, and GitHub within your engineering team. With this, I want to thank everyone in the panel. Thank you for joining us and giving us a time of day. Thank you for all of the panelists here. And please provide your feedback on that session within the URL here. Thank you so much and see you on the next panel. Have a great build.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.